Now, those cross-party Brexit talks that I seem to endlessly go on about, we're nearly 5 weeks into, are resuming today. I wish I could tell you maybe some progress from them, or at least something concrete. But we just seem to know that they go on, and they go on, and they go on. They're taking place between senior and Conservative Labour MPs, and they are trying to find common ground, those Conservative and Labour MPs, on a deal they can put to Parliament. But there's a twist now in this, which is starting to emerge. The Labour side of the negotiating table, led by the shadow Brexit Secretary Sir Keir Starmer, who's of course ultimately led by Jeremy Corbyn, wants a confirmatory vote on whatever they do manage to decide, big if, they do manage to get to something. He has warned that almost 2/3 of Labour MPs would reject any agreement that didn't include a confirmatory referendum. So it has to go back to you first and then back to Parliament? Let's try and figure this out, shall we? He says there's still considerable distance between the two parties on matters of substance, and Labour would soon decide whether it was worth staying in the talks at all. But if they do, and if they get somewhere, he wants a confirmatory referendum. Stephen Kinnock is a Labour MP and a member of the Brexit Select Committee. I think you're in a different camp on this one, Stephen.
I am, Emma, indeed. I really am very concerned that the reason that these talks are not getting any further is because the Labour Party is introducing an additional red line, which is that a confirmatory vote has to be inserted into the deal. And my view is that the Prime Minister will never whip her side to back a deal on that basis, and that is therefore torpedoing the talks. So, I hope that's not the case, but it does feel a bit from the interviews that have been given this morning that that's what's happening.
Yes, because we should say that Tom Watson, the deputy of the Labour Party, has been out and about this morning and is supporting Keir Starmer's position. So it does seem that at the top, but not perhaps quite at the top because of Jeremy Corbyn's position, this is the mood.
Yeah, and I'm just struggling to understand it because those who are campaigning for a second referendum, I'm assuming they know you can't have a referendum which is Remain versus Remain. You have to have a form of leave on the ballot paper. That means Parliament has to pass a deal. But if you try and load in a referendum into that deal, it's not going to pass because the Tories won't be to support it, and we're back to the old problem of parliamentary arithmetic. So let's get a deal done based on a customs arrangement and single market alignment, which has always been Labour's position, a sensible, pragmatic, bridge-building Brexit. Then, if those who are campaigning for a second referendum, they can immediately come back to Parliament and say, right, let's debate and vote putting that to a second referendum. And okay, if that passes, then we have the second referendum. But what you can't do is try to have your cake and eat it and insert the referendum into the process now, because that's just torpedoing the talks.
That's your fear. Of course, they may not have even raised this as part of the negotiations with the Conservative side. It may be posturing beyond the meeting.
Yeah, but if you do an interview with The Guardian and say, 2/3 of Labour MPs will insist on this, you're kind of inserting it into the talks, yes, via the media.
It's just an interesting thing. We're all speculating about where these talks have actually got to, and I suppose, as you say, your fear is that this could be one of the things that's holding it up. Of course, the other concern is it's the Prime Minister's red lines. We'll come on to the Conservative side in just a moment. How many Labour MPs are in your position who don't want a confirmatory vote?
It's extremely difficult to say, and I actually think there's a case for having a secret ballot in the PLP now.
Parliamentary Labour Party.
The acronyms. Within the Parliamentary Labour Party to establish this, because people are throwing all sorts of numbers around. It might be half, it might be 2/3, it might be fewer than that. A recent letter about this was signed by about 1/3 of the PLP, I think. So, there's frontbenchers who are bound by collective responsibilities, but if you had a secret ballot, you could actually establish the numbers. Maybe that's a way of stopping people just sort of pulling numbers out of the air.
So you're advocating for, if you like, a secret referendum within the Labour Party itself to know if there is support for a confirmatory referendum?
Well, I'm advocating for not having to answer these questions about how many MPs do you think? I can pull any number out of the air that I want. I recognise. So you don't have the number. I see that, but I suppose
Is Keir Starmer correct that the majority, just from your conversations with colleagues, and I know you mentioned that letter, it'd be interesting to hear a little bit more about that in just a moment, but from your talks with colleagues, do you have a sense that the majority do want a confirmatory referendum?
No, I don't have that sense, actually. I mean, I talk to a lot of colleagues who have deep-seated reservations about it. One of the things that comes up a lot, Emma, is what would the question be on the ballot paper? And the last 3 years have been defined by people sort of saying things about Brexit without really thinking through the consequences. Now, if we had a second referendum and no deal is not on the ballot paper, and yet you look at the support that there is for the Brexit Party that wants no deal, and recent polls saying at least 25% want to leave the EU without a deal. Now, I think it would be an absolute catastrophe for the economy, and I could never support actually creating a possibility of leaving without a deal. But on the other hand, would a referendum without no deal on the ballot paper have democratic legitimacy? I think turnout would drop by millions. So what happens then? You have a referendum, probably Remain wins, but on a turnout of at least 5 million fewer, and you'd just be into another battle for let's have best out of three. So I think it would be divisive, but not decisive. And a lot of my colleagues are sharing those concerns as we talk amongst ourselves.
Including Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, I think Jeremy has tried to, tread the line here between saying, look, I understand that there's strong support for having a second referendum in the membership, but that he's got these serious concerns about the democratic legitimacy of the process. And, in the end, Labour has to be a party that governs, that campaigns and governs for the whole country. And if you look at these opinion polls coming out now, we're seeing, I think, that the constant sort of campaigning for a second referendum, I think, is feeding support for the Brexit Party. Labour is not a single issue party. We've got to be offering policies which go right across from public services to the future of the economy. And as long as British politics is defined by a single issue of Brexit, it will only help the single issue parties, which are Change UK, the Lib Dems to some extent, and the Brexit Party. That's not us. We've got to get politics back on to the politics that people really want to talk about on the doorstep. And I think that means leaving the European Union with a sensible deal that protects jobs and livelihoods, but gets us back onto talking about the things that really matter for the future of our country.
So if you have a split between Jeremy Corbyn and his lead on Brexit, the shadow Brexit secretary like this, which seems to be the case, is that sort of approach, do you think, coordinated at the top, or has Keir Starmer gone rogue?
Well, I think there's two big challenges for the people who are campaigning for a second referendum. And I think Keir and the team are doing a great job of trying to hold these negotiations together and keep them on the road. And Keir is reflecting what he's hearing in the PLP, in the Parliamentary Labour Party. That's not necessarily a view that I share. But fundamentally, the big question is, what is the question on the ballot paper for a second referendum? And how do you actually think you're going to get a deal over the line if it's not whipped for by both the Conservative and Labour sides? That's the only way to get the stable majority that Keir himself is talking about. Until those campaigning for a second referendum can answer those two questions, I think it's very difficult to see how we break the deadlock. Let's get a deal done based on a customs arrangement, single market alignment, protecting jobs and the economy. And then if colleagues who are campaigning for a second referendum want to put that to a vote in Parliament, that on the basis of that deal, let's do that. But if we try to insert a referendum into these talks, we will torpedo the talks.
And just to understand, you mentioned a letter there that people had signed. Tell us about that, and how many signatories it got with regards to being against a referendum within the Labour Party.
It was a letter. I mean, there's a lot of these letters flying around. It was a couple of weeks ago. It was signed by Labour MPs and Labour MEPs, and I think there were some from the House of Lords as well. And my recollection, counting it in terms of just the MPs, I think it was around 70 Labour MPs that signed it. Don't quote me on this, please, but I think it was about 70, which is approximately a third of the Parliamentary Labour Party.
Who were against another referendum?
No, sorry, who were for? This was
This was for,
it was in the run up. Yeah, it was in the run up to our NEC meeting, and it was a letter imploring the NEC to have a second referendum on any deal that is done and to insert that into the talks. And I think it was signed by around 70 Labour MPs, which is approximately 1/3 of the Parliamentary Labour Party.
And you aren't going to shift your mind on this. You aren't going to change your mind about having a confirmatory referendum. Let's say they do get a deal. These talks result in a deal, and somehow Labour get it that it is part of the deal that a confirmatory referendum's in there. Would you support it then?
This whole process has been defined by people taking leaps of faith. I'm not prepared to take another one until somebody can tell me what the question on the ballot paper is going to be, how you ensure that it isn't going to just be a divisive but not a decisive process. Then I can't sign up to something when I don't know what I'm signing up to. And I think we've got to have that honest, clear debate about what the question on the ballot paper is going to be. Then you can look at that and say, well, yeah, okay, actually, given all the trade-offs and all the issues that we're looking at, that's something you can or can't sign up to. But my biggest concern is that there is massive support out there for leaving the European Union without a deal. I think that's would be an absolute catastrophe for the British economy. I think it probably leads to the end of the steelworks in my constituency. I could never sign up to that. And so, on the other hand, if you have a referendum without no deal on the ballot paper, you're going to have a massive boycott and turnout will drop by millions. And
so
that's
it's a big risk
I've
and it's a big headache that you don't want to be a part of. Well, we shall see what happens. Your idea for a secret ballot within the Labour Party to find out how many of your MPs actually want this. Do you think that's going to go anywhere, or is that you just hoping?
Probably not, Emma. And I just think we're into this absurd situation where people are throwing numbers around and not really able to substantiate it. So maybe that's one way of at least getting that clearing the air on that point. And I think that there is a clear need to have some solid evidence for backing up what people are saying on these vitally important issues for our national interest.
Stephen Kinnock, Labour MP and member of the Brexit Select Committee, thank you for your time and your insight with regards to where Labour is on Brexit.